Hello, everybody. Let's kindly wait a few minutes here to allow everyone to join us. Wait just one more moment for others to join. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first episode of the Thales CIAM webinar series. Does the future of CIAM depend on identity fabrics or identity suite? My name is Justin Van Eck, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. Joining us, we have Ward Duchamps, Senior Product Manager and acclaimed CIAM strategist at Thales. He'll be sharing his insights on how you can combat today's digital challenges, identify the right CIAM strategies for your business needs, and expedite your digital journey with the right identity model now and in the future. During this session, we do encourage you to send through any questions that you may have using the chat functions. We really value your engagement, and we'll try to address as many questions as possible live during the session. Any outstanding questions that we don't get to today will be responded to via email. And lastly, a recording of this webinar will be available on Bright Talk for your reference, together with additional material on CIAM. I want to thank you again for joining us. Over to you, Ward.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you for the introduction. It is my pleasure to be the host on this seminar. I think it's a topic that is close to what I've been doing in the past 2 decades. So I'm happy to share my perspective on identity suite versus identity fabrics and the future of CIAM. So let's first zoom in a little bit on the identity suite and what we mean with that if we refer to identity suite as a terminology. So from my perspective, this is like going back in time, and this is like being like 20 years ago back in time, where we had identity management capabilities that usually were delivered by one single vendor, and where you had a suite of different capabilities that actually became a core requirement and a core element in the identity and access management infrastructure. While today we talk about an identity fabric, and according to Kuppner Co., a fabric is, and quickly read it, it's a paradigm of a comprehensive set of identity services that deliver the capabilities required for providing seamless and controlled access for everyone to every service. And it contains quite a lot of information, and it's quite a heavy thing to read as an introduction, but still there is a lot of value in this. If you would cut this into some more comprehensive elements, I would say that identity fabrics is actually about 3 main things. It's about how that you agree upon with all your stakeholders, all your constituencies, how that you want to govern identity. So it's really the left part on making sure that you've got some kind of agreement and common understanding what you do and what you want to do with identity, as well as with the data that you collect. Next to that, there's a piece on architecture. So where we have to find a way to use architectural blueprints, trying to prevent that we have to reinvent the wheel each and every time again. And so that we've got a predefined set of capabilities that we can use and reuse in multiple infrastructures. And then the third important element in an identity fabric is all about integrations, because you will see that we will combine multiple technologies. And in order to combine multiple technologies, we need to have a very flexible framework to integrate different technologies into one set of services. And that's for me kind of the very high level introduction in the topic of an identity fabric. But fabrics are everywhere. And in order to better understand the idea of what we try to introduce into the market, I quickly want to make a jump and a comparison with another sector that is actually very mature in the adoption of a commonly understood fabric. And that industry is the energy sector, because they managed to connect quite a lot of different things into one grid of energy supply. And what you see here at the left are a number of different consumers. And they all differ very, very much, actually, because they deal with different type of use cases, like doing the laundry versus taking a high-speed train is a completely different type of use case. They also differ in the origin of the equipment that is actually used. So the high-speed train versus the robotic installation come from different technology vendors. And they also differ in types of personas that are actually involved at the consumer side. And the level of expertise and the level of knowledge about the fabric and everything which is behind might differ quite extensively. So the person doing the laundry actually likely doesn't even know that there's actually how the electricity gets into the machine. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you also have a number of different resource providers in the grid. And also on the resource provider, there's a lot of big diversity in types of providers that actually generate energy in the network. You've got very decentralized providers, very local providers, and very centralized providers, for instance. But you also have different types of life cycle. Life cycle will become a very important word and later on as well, because the coal power plants that you see at the bottom, they've got a life cycle of about 80 years or even more, while the windmills and everything else actually has a very short life cycle. But at the end, all of these different suppliers and consumers still are interconnected in one distributed power grid. And without thinking too much about it, we managed, or the energy industry managed, to find a way actually to have a free flow of energy between the suppliers at the right and the consumers at the left. And how that the sector actually managed to deal or to introduce such a fabric, that's really based on standardization. Standardization in governance, because the energy sector is very, very heavily regulated, but also standardization in architecture. You do not have to rethink how that you want to connect the power outlet to a socket, because these things have been blueprinted for you. And then also in terms of integrations, there are a number of predefined patterns for integration on how that you actually connect devices to the grid. But that's a very mature and relatively old sector that actually managed to introduce the concept of a fabric. But how do we do now in identity? We're not that mature yet. If you see how complexity of identity and access management actually is increasing, then you also can appreciate, I hope, the challenge that we have if you want to introduce a concept like a fabric. In the past, access was typically referred to physical entry. And so the verification whether someone was allowed or not allowed to get access was very often based on a set of very specific predefined criteria. Also, what we saw from the vendor point of view is that access typically was addressing the workplace and less about other users that interact in the digital ecosystem. And we see a certain evolution going on, and we see an evolution into digital access control. So we see more and more demand also from our customers and our market on help us dealing with digital access, and also bridging physical and digital access as well. But by doing so, we start to introduce additional new attack vectors. So we expose IT in its overall to new vulnerabilities and new potential attack vectors that can jeopardize security. So moving forward, in that everything digital we have to make sure that we can cope with the complexity, because the complexity will only increase in the years to come. And so what you cannot have in such a complex world is a point solution. Instead, we have to think about more like a combination of solutions that actually can realize the promise of access for everyone to every service. And so let's zoom into that everyone and any service for a moment. So everyone really means like everyone. And there you see at the left, employees, consumers, business partners, and machines and things. These are actually all consumers of what will become the identity fabric in a minute. But they differ very much in terms of characteristics. So employees typically have a relatively low volume, but the level of access that needs to be managed for them has a high level of complexity. Security first is the main paradigm. While for consumers, security first is not necessarily the main paradigm or the main concern. It's more about convenience first, and security might be the second biggest thing, right? Consumers typically come at high volume, but with a low complexity. So it's a completely different ball game, if so to speak, if you want to work in the identity environment. Business partners have requirements about distributed management, so that the management of users can be delegated to different teams around the globe. And also a very high diversity. One business partner can be completely different than another business partner. And then machines and things are yet something that still is very nascent in the industry, I would say, because there you've got a large scale set of new devices. And you also see an increase in non-personalized devices. So we pretty well managed to deal with personal devices like a smartphone or a laptop or things like that. But and even the set-top box for your television, we managed to deal with that. But the shared devices or the non-personalized devices that actually have their own life cycle, have their own say in the digital world, this is something that is hard to connect to. And then at the right, we've got suppliers in the digital ecosystem. We've got on-prem apps, we've got SaaS apps, APIs, infrastructures. Again, all these different things have different characteristics. But at the end, we want to connect the consumer of the service, any consumer, with any type of service at the right. And that's actually the play for the identity and access management fabrics. Zooming in a little bit on the fabric and the benefits, how I see a fabric is that it is designed as a set of microservices. Microservices being a very well-defined technical component, technical brick that does one particular thing very good, right? That's what we call a microservice. And you connect different microservices together. You connect them in an event-based architecture, meaning that it's all driven by events. Something happens, and that something can be triggered by an end user, can be triggered by something from the context, and that actually puts the platform into motion. And that's what we refer to as an event-based architecture. That's how we design an identity fabric. How that we build an identity fabric is all about combining reusable, best-in-class technology bricks. So you take different microservices and put them together in a platform, in an ecosystem. But how that they should be operated is that we want to operate the fabric as one of the core services in an IT landscape. So it's a very service-oriented idea where the fabric delivers identity and access management services to the rest of the IT landscape. And to realize that idea, we have to make sure that we've got services that are easily to integrate with, ideally based on standards, because that's also what we learned from the other industries. And so that is, for me, the three key things actually to build an identity fabric, and it will give us a certain return. And the return and the benefit will be that we actually start enabling innovation, because by having a strong identity framework, identity foundation in your landscape, you can start building new types of business cases and new types of business models as well. You can digitally interact with consumers. For example, in the car rental industry. Your mobile driving license, which is now digitized in some states in the US, actually can be sufficient to prove that you indeed have a driving license to rent a car, right? And so that puts a process that was traditionally a paper-based process, puts that into a digital world, and so that actually enables a lot of different business models in that particular domain. Having a sound identity fabric also optimize operations, and so we can reduce deficiencies, have more people involved in the identity processes, and basically making sure that we get a smooth end-to-end process for onboarding, but also for offboarding of people in that digital ecosystem. And by selecting the right components at the right place, overall we can lower the total cost of ownership, and rather than just trying to fix everything with one and the same suite, we now basically can put things together and basically buy based on value, which at the end will return a better return on investment. And by making sure that we know that we indeed have a fabric that is constructed with multiple components, multiple technology bricks, if we know that well, we can also apply a certain security control on top of that, and that we actually overall reduce the security risk by applying their good practices to protect both the identity assets as well as the digital assets. So let's zoom a little bit on one particular case study to give you an idea on how this could turn into practice. And the case study is based on a real-life example in an Industry 4.0 use case that we've been working on with a manufacturing company that works together with a number of business partners. And the business partners come from the academic world, so universities that actually help in the manufacturing process, but they also come from the industrial world, where partners deliver staff augmentation. Both type of partners actually want to be engaged and involved in the identity processes. So the little process that I want to illustrate here is that where a team lead from one of these business partners starts to onboard a new member for his team. And the journey starts with the team lead that invites a new member to join his team. And so the second step is that new member, the invitee, now will get an invitation. But the first thing that she will be asked to do is proof of identity. So she needs to present her identity document, and we do some identity verification to make sure that the person is indeed who he claims to be. As a second step, that new member can register a number of authenticators. And that can be a very traditional user ID password, but that could also be a smart card. That could also be a wearable where you actually link where you use the wearable as an authenticator. And there with the new types of authentication with FIDO, FIDO2, you actually see a lot of different authenticators that will make its way into the industry. Maybe you want to add one additional control step, so where the team lead needs to attest that there is indeed new access needed for that particular member. So he needs to tick in the box, verify that there is indeed a new user, a new type of access that needs to be granted. Before then, that now the new member can get logical access to a number of apps, number of resources, and can actually start doing its work in the digital world. But equally, that new member in manufacturing, remember Industry 4.0, that new member also might need to get access to certain production facilities, or maybe certain areas of the assembly line. And we now want to combine the logical access that has been granted based on a byte share and authenticator, and we now also want to link that with physical access. But physical access with smart cards might be cumbersome, so why not use facial recognition or a fingerprint, right? And so moving a little bit further into complexity and use case, we now also can start authorizing transactions rather than just sessions. So, for instance, in an assembly line, the quality assurance engineer needs to approve that he did some checks on a particular piece of the manufacturing line, and he actually signs off that he approves that the quality check has been done. So it's more about authorizing that particular transaction rather than giving that user a full desktop session experience. And so in these type of use cases, you actually already can see and feel the effect of an identity fabric. Because if you start tagging technology bricks on this use case, you actually can see quite a lot of them. So you've got delegate user management in step number one, identity verification, where we check identity documents, where we do liveness check, where we even can check identities that are presented to us based on digital wallets. You've got in Europe the tendency now to that governments now to start issuing identity wallets, like in Belgium, but also in other countries. We now actually also can use these wallets to get a proof of identity. And then we need to register authenticators. So we need some kind of a directory. We need the ability for the user to bring his own identity, because that's convenient for the end user. We need some lightweight IGA solution to make sure that the team lead can now attest access for his member. But we also might need additional access controls based on policies, based on context, in order to make sure that we can enforce logical access, not only in traditional apps, but maybe also on APIs. So we also need some kind of API access control. And then in the physical realm, there is a very interesting motion currently in the market on 502, NFC, and actually as replacements and or as a next version of smart cards. And there you actually also see a number of different technology bricks that could be very useful to address certain types of use case. Going back to the facial recognition, we might even want to team up with a provider of biometric gates, where you actually have a gate that automatically opens if you're recognized at the gate. Maybe you experienced something similar at the gate of an airport. And then moving into the last piece, there might also be a need for real-time threat management, or digitally signing of documents, digital signing of transactions. Maybe we even want to capture all these ledgers and all these different signatures in a particular ledger. And so what you see, and what I hope that you can now appreciate in this, is that in this one particular journey, in this one particular use case, you have a number of different technology bricks that all need to work and collaborate together in order to build the ideal user experience for both users in this particular scenario. So going back to the very simple question, if we want to stay ahead of the curve, do we want to invest in an identity suite, or do we want to invest in an identity fabric? I would definitely I'm trying to convince you indeed that the fabric approach is what we believe that will help us preparing ourselves for a future that we actually do not know yet. Because comparing quickly again with what we do with the energy sector, so overall the identity industry and the identity and access management industry is still very immature. So we still have to do quite some wrap up actually to make sure that we can keep up with the pace of technical evolution. And so in a fabric, we should be in a better position to deal with that new future that we do not know yet. So key takeaways of this webinar is that, first of all, design your identity fabric based on microservices. So use different bricks and bring these bricks together in one solution. Secondly, much technology with use cases. So just like what we did for the use case in Industry 4.0, try to much technology with use case and not the opposite, right? So the technology can only bring value if it fits in use cases that you want to support. But then again, acknowledge imperfection, because in our industry, there is still so much to do, and there are still things that might not work as designed today, but that we actually know that we will need in the future. And so there is a certain imperfection that we still have to deal with. And so it might need some bolts and some tricks to stitch certain things together for a certain period of time, which is fine if it's done consciously and if it's done with the idea of a higher good at the long run. Come back to that in a minute. And in order to overcome that imperfection, I think it's imperative to work with your IAM vendors jointly as a partner, so that they can understand what's needed, that they can understand what's up next, and what type of evolutions that are expected in your particular industry. Going back to stitching things together, so a very important principle as well is that you need to design for agility. So each and every component in that fabric, each and every microservice in that fabric can have a different life cycle. Some of them might be there for years. Other components might have a very short life cycle. And so if you design for agility, you can actually make sure that you can deal with these diverse life cycles. And things that are imperfect today, maybe we find a way to compensate for that, but still deliver the use case. While tomorrow there might be an off-the-shelf solution that is actually ready to do all these different things. And last but not least, just like we do, I think that we as an industry, we need to invest more in standardization. So any option that you see to support standardization, actually, I would embrace that and make sure that you actually are part of that motion to support and to increase the use of standardization, because that's key in order to overcome the challenges that are ahead of us. That being said, I think it's time for some questions. I've seen some questions popping in the chat. So, Justin?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for providing that valuable insight today. Yeah, let's jump into the chat here to answer some questions. It looks like one question we have is, can organizations that have already defined their digital strategy and are implementing the majority of it consider adopting identity fabrics as a way to modernize their identity journey, or should they consider adopting this approach earlier in the process when defining their digital strategy?
Okay. So what I get from this is that, do we need an identity fabric before or after a digital strategy? My answer would say that it's part of a digital strategy, and that it needs to fit in whatever your company wants to do and whatever the ambition is in terms of digitization. A fabric can be a true business enabler. If we know more about the people that actually use digital services, if we find ways to engage with them very early on in the process, we can also build new types of businesses, new types of business processes. Think about, for instance, embedded insurance in the industry, in the insurance industry. There you've got the the experience that you can buy an insurance, for instance, when you book a ticket for a flight, right? In order to make this seamless, you actually need to make sure that the insurance company gets to know all the details of the person that actually bought the ticket. So having an identity fabric can actually solve that issue and make sure that you share the information that is necessarily under the consent of the consumer to the insurance company. And so doing that is part of digital transformation and is part of digital strategy. But in order to do that, the identity fabric is definitely an enabler. So I would definitely try to align both design processes at the same time.
Great. Let's check out another one here. It looks like, how does an identity fabric support compliance in a world of global privacy regulations and data protection requirements?
Okay. I think that the fabric fits very well in dealing with global, diverse privacy requirements. Let me use an example here. So in Germany, for instance, you've got a privacy law that dictates that you need double opt-in from each and every consumer. What it actually means is that if you've got a website and you have a user that wants to sign up for that website, you have to ask for a first opt-in, where the user actually ticks in a box and says, I agree with the terms and conditions of this website. Right? But for German law, that's just not enough. You also need a second confirmation of that consumer via an alternative path, via an alternative communication channel, typically email. So you have to have an email sent to the consumer with a unique link that the consumer, again, for a second time, double opt-in, confirms that he agrees with the terms and conditions of, and the privacy policies. This is a very typical German thing. And to be honest, it's a very ugly user experience because you have to click too many times. And so in Europe, that is a very common problem because a retail company or an insurance company in France or the rest of Europe, they do not want to adopt the strict German laws for each and every consumer because the hassle in the user experience would be too big. And so having different components that deal sometimes with the double opt-in, sometimes not with the double opt-in, actually helps us driving compliance on a global scale as well. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump in. I think we'll have time for another here. Let's go with, should the functionality of an identity fabric rely on an API first approach?
My personal preference is definitely yes, but not only API. So I think that APIs is anyhow what we already do today. So APIs, GraphQL, and whatever you are, the de facto standard to build integrations. But APIs will not solve everything because next to that, we also need more standards in the identity space. So OpenID Connect, well known, SAML, well known, OAuth as well, right? But that's not enough. We also need additional standards, like for instance, CAPE SSE for exchanging events, security events. We need a better evolution on FIDO and certainly on single device FIDO versus multi-device FIDO, and some challenges that we have in that domain. So APIs definitely yes, and that's one of these things, one of these technologies that we actually use to compensate the lack of certain standards. But if standards are available, I would definitely first investigate whether the standards can deal with the use cases that you want to address.
Excellent, excellent. We do have a few other questions that came in. We'll go ahead and follow up with those via email after the session today. In the meantime, I do want to take a moment to thank you, Ward. That was very valuable today, which you provided. I hope everybody on the call has some takeaways from the session today. And I want to take a moment to have everybody mark your calendars for the next webinar in the series. That'll take place July 13th. It's titled Breaking Free from Legacy CIAM, the key to unlocking your insurance company's digital potential. This specific session, it promises to provide valuable strategies specifically tailored to the insurance industry. So you don't want to miss out on the opportunity there to enhance your digital capabilities. We also have a series later in August, which will be US data privacy landscape. You'll see there that exploring lessons learned from Europe's game-changing GDPR. Also make sure to register for that event. You can go to our Bright Talk link and you can register for the entire series, or you can just register for each webinar. So feel free to do that. We definitely encourage you to do so now, or after this call would be fantastic, and we'd love to have everybody on the call join us for the rest of the series. Once again, we want to express our gratitude for your participation today. We hope that you found lots of value in today's webinar. If there are any questions that you have about CIAM, please don't hesitate to reach out to the team here at Thales. And we thank you again and hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Thanks, Ward.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.